It looks like This Evil Thing will be the first part of an anti-war trilogy. Can Conscious members get a flavor of what is coming up in part 2?
Part 2, I intend it to move on to the Second World War and a rather significant event in that, the dropping of the first atomic bomb. So I'm currently looking at it as a two-hander for two performers, because This Evil Thing is a solo play. And it's going to focus on one of the scientists involved in creating the atomic bomb, one of the soldiers, well, the pilot that flew the plane that dropped the bomb, and one of the survivors on the morning of August 6th, 1945 in Hiroshima, who survived the blast and then witnessed the devastation all around her. So that's what plays currently. Well, it's certainly going to be about that. That's the form it's taking at the moment. And the third part of the trilogy will be modern day, World War III, I hope not. I'm not sure at all where that will be. It could be in Syria, I don't know yet. But I've done a lot of work on the atomic bomb play, researching it and so on. I'm hoping that will come to light next year or the year after for the 75th anniversary of the dropping of the bomb in 2020.
This Evil Thing will continue touring this autumn. Why should people see this play?
Well, militarism is not on the decrease, is it? In schools. I've had a lot of trouble getting this on in schools. I've approached a number of schools, and the only schools that have really responded have been the Quaker schools. They've welcomed it with open arms. Although I've had some very challenging questions from pupils in those schools, because they're not all Quaker children in those schools. And the most obvious question, or the most common question, being, what about Hitler? And I say, well, how long have you got to discuss that? And I tell them how conscientious objection was far more acceptable, far more accepted in the Second World War, surprisingly. But in schools, there is increasing, the army are going into schools, they are recruiting in subtle and not so subtle manners, so subtle ways, they are talking about careers in the army. I feel that needs to be counteracted. And generally, as November 2018 approaches, 100 years since the end of the war, supposedly to end all wars, there will clearly be the tone one already senses is going to be of, mournful remembrance, rightly, of those who lost their lives in the battles, remembering those final battles. And it seems to me, again, there isn't going to be anything really to mark the courage of those who stood up against the war, the conscientious objectors. So in my own modest way, I want to tour the play again in November, to try and reach out to people to say, yes, remember those who fell fighting for their country, but can we not equally remember those who refused to fight, believing that this was the best way to gain peace? This was truly the way to peace is not war. And also to remember the courage of those young men and the men and women who supported them 100 years ago in the face of great hostility.